recorded. So Maya again, with the Alt key and the left mouse, you can rotate this, and keeping the Z forward and Y up is probably a good policy. And with the middle roller, if you press it down, you can move it up and down. If you roll, you can actually zoom in and out. But I find the right mouse with the Alt key, you can zoom in and out a lot better. And so this is our virtual plane. Now in Maya, each grid is a certain unit depending upon what your preferences are set to. My preferences are set to a centimeter. So each grid is a centimeter. So if you wanted to make things to scale, you could make them to scale by adjusting this. Now, most of the time when I'm working in Maya, I start out for beginners, especially in modeling and polymodeling. It's interesting, you have to click both tabs. I don't ever find a time where I'm not in modeling and polymodeling or not in animation and in animation. So for me, I think one tab would work. Maybe I'm, after doing this for 12 years or more, maybe I'm not advanced enough to know why you would have this in modeling and have this in sculpting instead. But you can do that. I just tend to do both. Now, if you hold down the space bar, you'll notice that these windows here are the same as up here. So if you got used to doing the space bar, it's less distance to travel. I've never totally gotten used to it, but I'm working on getting used to it. But for a beginner, this is a lot of information and it gets rather confusing. So with the space bar down, I can go to hotbox control and I can say hide all. And so when I hold the space bar down, all it gives me is this. And so in Maya, if I press on it, perspective view, left view, top view, back view, front view, bottom view, right view, and a new camera if you needed to. I normally do the new camera in the rendering box up here. But perspective view is really nice. Now, most 3D programs, you model in 3 views so you can see the front, the right, and the top at the same time. But in Maya, since it has these constraint handles, you can model in this perspective view, and I like it a lot better. But it's really important that when you're moving things, you can use the constraint handles. I'm going to use a box here. Now notice you could go here, or you could go to create poly primitives. And if you had that tab on with the space bar, you could go to create poly primitives. But for beginners, I simplify this just because it's a lot to look at, and Maya's a very big program. So over here, I can click on the cube. So you have a visual. And so this cube is here. And if we look at this cube, I'm using the Alt key and right mouse to zoom in. You can also hit F to fit any object or A to fit all objects and Alt to rotate it. You can see that this cube is actually one grid across because it's going a half a grid here and a half a grid here. So this cube is 1 centimeter by centimeter, so it's about that big. So it's pretty small. Now, if you wanted this to be a specific size, you can, and under Create, they have these measuring tools. And I find the measuring tools work a little better if you're in the front view or the side view. And so if I hold spacebar down, I can go to right view, or you could click here and get all 4 and then put your mouse over the side view and tap the spacebar and you're in the side view. And so you're looking straight on at this object. So it looks like just a square, but it's actually a cube. And so under Create, and this works for 3D printing very well. So Yulia was talking about 3D printing last time. And so here's a distance tool. And so if I click here and I click over here, it'll tell you the distance. And I'm just slightly off. See what it says 1? Well, my preferences, if I go up to, I believe here to preferences, you can go in there and you can change it to meters or change it to inches. But right now this one is 1 centimeter and just a hair more. So So this cube is 1 centimeter across. Now these things don't print or don't render this measuring tool, but sometimes it just gets in the way. So I click on it and you can just hit delete and delete it away. Now they also have under create different tools, measuring tools, distance, parameter, and arc tool. So if you wanted to do an arc. Now I've never really used the parameter, but I think what it is if you click and click and click and go around a shape. If you wanted to know the circumference, you could do that. I'll check into that one. But so let's say we wanted to make a cube that would print on a 3D printer. I'm going to hit the space bar real quick and get to these 4 views and then put my cursor over perspective and hit perspective. Or you can hold down your space bar and go to perspective view. This cube, Alt key, left mouse, is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. But we have 4 different keys, Q, W, E, R. Q deselects any of the tools. W is the move tool, which I can move this on the x-axis by going to the arrowhead. I can move it on the y-axis. That always keeps it lined up if you use these constrain tools. Or you can move it from the middle, which I don't tend to do because it's hard to tell where you're putting it. So the handles here. Now, these handles, if you hit the plus key, they get bigger. And the minus key makes them smaller if they're ever hard to grab, like this one's off the edge. So I can go minus and get these handles here. Now, that's W. That's the move tool. Now, W doesn't make any sense, but Q, W, E, R are right next to each other. So sometimes when I'm working, I keep my fingers on Q, W, E, R. And so if I hit E, it's the rotation tool. The colors, RGB, relate to XYZ. So X axis, which is from this way, I can rotate it on a shaft that goes down the X axis. In an airplane, that'd be called pitch. Y is the green, X, Y, RGB, red, green, blue. So the green one, I can move it on the Y axis, which goes up and down. So if you had a shaft going straight up, on this one, if you think about an airplane, this would be called yaw, side to side. This doesn't look like an airplane, but anyway. And roll here would be the Z axis. So X, Y, Z, RGB. So with this, if I hit R, it gives me these constraint handles for resizing this, and I can make it half as tall. Now, is it exactly half as tall? I can't tell, but if I go to my channel box, which is this one right here, but it's also here, you can see that it's almost half as tall because 100% is 1. So 1 would be, in this case, 10 centimeters. And here, if I go 0.5 and hit enter, then it's half of 10 centimeters. It's 5 centimeters tall. So you can judge the sizes that way. Now, this box, if I wanted to 3D print it, I have to export it as a file that 3D printers like. They like OBJs, which is an object, and they like STLs, which is a stenographic file. I don't know why they call it a stenographic file.
Doug, a quick question. Did I miss when you made it bigger because I thought it was 1 centimeter? But now
each square is 10 centimeters since my preferences is set to that.
Oh, okay.
But you can, in preferences, if you go window to preferences, you can come in here and you can change your units. I think it's, see how these undos, mine's set to infinite. That will bog down things after a while. So maybe you could set it to 50 undos and it doesn't mess with your RAM as much. But here, and I always forget which one it is. I think it's settings. Nope, unit. Should be called units, but I always just have to go through and click on it till I find it. And it makes sense once I click on it, but there's a lot of choices here and it'll show references, files.
Because when you created the cube, you said it's just small.
Yeah, well, because it comes in at one grid and my grids are set to centimeters.
Yeah.
So if I had this set to meters, if I made a cube, it would be a meter across, which is about 3 feet. So you can decide ahead of time what unit you like to work in. I like working in centimeters, millimeters, or meters because it's always multiplied by 10, which makes more sense. When I was in elementary school, and I was in elementary school, oh, 51 years ago, I started elementary school. They told us that in 1 or 2 years, we were going to convert to the metric system. Well, America was very stubborn and we've never really quite changed over. Even though liters seem to make more sense than gallons, inches don't make as much sense as centimeters or millimeters or meters or kilometers. We never switched over. So you can set this ahead of time. It's just you need to be aware if mine is set to centimeters, when I make an object, that's a sphere, this one's coming in and you see that its radius is 10 millimeters, a centimeter. So this is 2 centimeters across, 20 millimeters.
So how do you know? So a grid, what is a grid?
This is the grid right here. These
Okay.
are the grid. And so that grid is always, though you could turn it off if you don't like it. I recommend having the grid. So if you don't have a grid, or if you're not sure, you need to check in your windows to your preferences, see what you're set to, and then you can actually create a measure tool, distance, and if I click here to here, it'll tell me really basically 2 centimeters, so 20 millimeters. And I
Okay,
can, or you can delete those. So I actually rotated this cube a little bit, which is not good. And if you look here, there's a rotation in the channel box here. And I can type 0. If you wanted to.
So right now you have about a centimeter long, this thing, this cube?
It's a centimeter long and half a centimeter tall, 5 millimeters.
Okay. Got it.
And I straightened it out because if I brought it into a 3D printer and it was angled, it wouldn't sit on the bed of the printer very well. And if it's angled, it would pop loose and it would not print correctly. So 3D printers want a couple things. They want those files I talked about, either OBJ or an STL. Mine prefers an STL, .stl. And so it also wants it to be triangles. The reason it wants it to be triangles, because triangles, if you move a triangle, it's always flat. No matter where you put the points, it always describes a flat area. Flat, flat. 4 points, you can twist them and they're not flat. They're not flat. They're called non-planar. So this one, you can come in and modify and convert this to triangles. It's triangulate. Where is it? I think it's under mesh. Triangulate. So you notice it turned these into triangles. It doubled my poly count. I now have 12 faces when before I had 6. Control Z. But for a 3D printer, they want them to be triangles, mesh, triangulate. So the 3D printer knows that these planes are flat. So if I wanted to print this, I could file, and I could either export the selection or export all if I had more than one piece. And in here, if you have it set up correctly, you can export this as an OBJ, and there are converters that can convert it to STL. If I go down here below and we look at it, right now I don't have any OBJ, but in my preferences, so, and I can always tell this again, but we have a plugin manager, and that plugin manager, if I go down to STL, or OBJ in this case, OBJ export mill, if I load and I go auto load and I refresh, then if I go to this file, export selection, it will now give me that OBJ option to export this for a 3D printer, and you can export it to the desktop or wherever you want to save it. So when you do that, I've got to get my printer working. I'll do it this week, and I can actually show you how to export this to print it. Now, there's a couple of things that are interesting with 3D printers. Now, this has a nice flat bottom, so it's going to print fine because it'll sit there, and it doesn't have any overhangs. But let's say I wanted to print something that is my face, and my face has an overhang, this nose. When the printer starts printing, it can print up here, but when it gets to the nose, the material goes out here and it's not supported, it's soft, and while it's cooling, it will droop. So if I have a nose like that, I need to, with the printer, tell it to put supports in, and it'll make a little support structure like a trellis or like a fire escape underneath my nose. Now those trellises, when you're done, can be peeled off, but then it leaves a little roughness, but you can sand that and it's fine. So I like to design things that if I was going to print them, something like this, and I'm going to make a cube, and that cube I'm going to go R and make it just a little bigger. I'm going to move the cube down using the handle. And I'm just going to take half of this sphere, and I go to right view. And if I take this sphere and I go to the cube, there's a thing under mesh called Boolean. I don't like it as much in Maya. Sometimes it's very stubborn and doesn't like doing things, but sometimes it's the only way you can make the shape. But I'm going to go difference here, and it cuts the bottom off. So if I go to perspective view, if I wanted to print this in a 3D printer, since this is about 30 degrees, it could layer, print this whole thing without any supports because nothing's overhanging. You could even take this, and if you go Control D to duplicate it and move this down and maybe even R to resize it a little bit. If I select this one first, the next one second, mesh, Boolean, in this case difference, I've made a little cup kind of thing. Maybe this is for holding a snowball or some ice cream. But you could print it this way because it's flat. And since it's hollow, but it's a gradual curve, it could print this. You'd have to make it triangulars under mesh, triangulate. And then you could export that and you could print that. I even like doing things that are hollow. I had a ball that had a little flat base so it would stand up. And then when it printed about halfway, I went and I put gravel inside it, little pea gravel that's round, and then I let it finish printing. And then when I have it, it goes, it's around here somewhere, a little noise maker. Hey, there's the kitty. Hi. Come here. Come here, good girl. You're a good girl. Come here. She's not going to let me grab her. I'm going to grab her. No, I can't grab her. Okay. She gets away. She's a good girl. She's running around trying to see what's going on. She shakes her bell. Okay, so there are some things you need to think about when you're doing 3D printing. Now, if it was something that was upside down like this, if you tried to print it, it would break loose because it's curved. But you can always tell the printer to make a raft, and it'll make a platform that'll help to keep this from popping loose. I always like to have a little flat area, but supports could help on this one too. So those are a couple things. Let me go ahead and I'll delete this object. I'm holding down my right mouse and pressing on top of the object, going to object mode, clicking on it, and then I can delete it. So we have these different primitives here that we can start making things. Sometimes with a beginner, we make a submarine or a blimp or something like that. But you could certainly make a snowman if this was, well, if it's Mother's Day, let's make a flower, all right? So the center of the flower, I can use a sphere. Now, with spheres, don't like these pizza wedges here facing this way. I always tend to rotate this on the x-axis 90 degrees. That way, if I hit R and I flatten this to be the center of the daisy, it has these little pizza wedges here and on the back. Now, any questions so far? Doing okay, Joe, Yulia?
Yep, doing good. Just following along.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'll just
Okay.
rewatch, I guess.
Did I move a little slower?
No, it's fine.
Okay, sometimes you just need to see these a couple times and I will review. Notice this has these little facets here. Now, if I was maybe making a fancy flower, I could click here and I could change the number of facets around the sides. So instead of 20, maybe if I wanted it to be a little more angular, maybe cubistic, which is a style that some painters did, you could see I could lower it and that makes it look a little more angular. So it might be more of a mathematic flower. But if I wanted this to be really smooth, I could come here and in my channel box, you can scoot down. I'm grabbing both of them and I'm typing in 40. And you can see that makes it much smoother. Now, probably you know, Joe, but why would we want to not have it have so many polygons? Because right now this has got faces 1600.
Yeah, quite a bit of polys
And with
for texturing.
yeah, with lots of polys in a game, and the games have gotten so much better, but the higher the poly count, when you move the joystick, it takes longer to respond. Because the processor has to, well, that's 1600 polygons instead of maybe if we had it at the lower size. Now, if this was way in the distance, this flower, and we're never going to zoom in on it, I could probably put this to, you know, maybe, let's go 10. And when it's at 10, can we really see the facets? Not as much. But if this story said that we're going to zoom in on this flower, then the 10 might not make it look like a flower. It looks like a bad wheel on a Roman cart, which wouldn't work when the cavemen were trying to develop the wheel and they didn't quite get round. So going to 40, if you're going to render this and make a movie out of it, it just takes longer to render, but you're not worried about poly count if you're doing a movie like the movies at the beginning of games, which are all detailed and beautiful. They can be very high poly because they render them first. So for this, we can make it very smooth, especially if our storyboard says the bee flies by the flower and comes in real close. That's good. The cherry really helped. So we can take this and I can duplicate it. Control. How do we duplicate things, Julia? We want to duplicate it.
Duplicate.
Control D, duplicates it. Now, when you duplicate something, see how it has these almost checkerboard edges? See how they're dashy? That's because two objects are directly in line with each other. And when that happens, the textures get confused. So if you duplicate something, move it. I hit W to move it. And I'm going to make this into the pedal. If I hit R, I can resize it this way to make it thinner. And I can make it a little longer if I wanted to. And I could also take this pedal, make it a little narrower this way. R. And if you wanted to, you could hit E. The cat wants me to chase her. And rotate it just a little bit. So if this was going to be printed on a 3D printer, makes this little propeller, and you put a little hole in the center and put it on a shaft, this could blow in the wind. So you could make a little flower that blew in the wind for your mother. She could put it in the garden. Okay, so with this one, I duplicated it. Now, I want to move the pivot to the center of this because I want to use duplicate special, which is under edit, to duplicate it and rotate it around to do all the pedals. So if I take this and I hit D, it lets me move the pivot. And if I go to my right view, I'm holding the space bar and left mouse, you can see that I can move it until it goes to the grid line. If I told it to snap to grid, you could see that it could snap directly to the grid. And if I look at it in perspective view and I move it, you can see it'll snap to the grid. So it's snapped to the grid. So now if I rotate this flower, I can go edit, duplicate by type. No, edit, duplicate special. Now, duplicate special, normally it remembers what I did last time. See how this is rotate 90 degrees and do 3? And it's rotating on the X, Y, Z axis, which is going back. So if I applied this, you could see I can make a flower with 4 petals. Looks more like the propeller of an airplane. So when I do this, I undid that. Under edit, you can reset this. I do want to rotate it on the Z axis. How many petals should a flower have? They vary. How many petals do you want, Joe?
You can go 4 or 5. I don't know if my camera's working now.
4
or 5.
Yeah, okay. We could do 4 or we could do 5. Now 5, you have to divide 5 into 360. And I think that would
we can stick with 4 to keep it simple.
4. So if you want to do 4, you want 3 more petals. And so 360 divided by 4. If you're going to move this around, how many degrees would you have 4 petals?
90?
90 degrees on the Z axis, 90. And I could hit apply. And so you could have 4 petals on your flower. I think that's a little skimpy with these thin petals. So what I'm going to do instead of 90, I'm going to undo. And I'm going to go 45, which would give us 8 petals. And I'm going to say 7. And I can say apply. And so there's our flower.
So you put numbers for duplicate without the original one because you put 7, right?
Yeah, because it already has 1 and it's making the duplicates. If I put 8, you'd have an extra one on top of one of these, and then the textures wouldn't be quite right. You'd have to go, oh, I've got an extra one, you'd have to delete it. So yeah, it's one less than your total amount because you already have one. So if I would have colored these and textured them before I duplicated them, it would have been a smart move because now I have to select them and colorize them. Let me say hi to Pam. Hello, Pam. I'm doing a Maya lesson. I'll be done by an hour. All right, bye-bye. Pam's been recorded. All right, so sometimes if you think about those things, you're going to be a little better off. Now, I'm going to go here and click on these. And just because I want to put a stem down, I'm going to rotate them. Up, somehow we got an extra set. How did I get an extra set? Probably duplicated it twice. But I like the way it looks. So there's a happy accident, all right? Happy accident. If we want to make a stem, Yulia, how would you make a stem for this?
Well, I would either have one petal and kind of stretch it out or make another shape. I don't know.
You could do that. You could make a petal and stretch it out. That might give it a kind of a uniform feel. I was thinking kind of a cylinder. So if I do a cylinder and I go R and make it in the middle, make it very thin, and then make it taller. Now, with the cylinder, if you want to do tall, that's the Y. And you could just type in maybe 10 times and go here. Now, W, move it down. And that could be the stem. Now, I could move it back. I think it's a little thick. If I go R, I can do this and make it thinner. And then W to move it up. And I could actually maybe rotate it or get rid of one petal that's in the way of the stem or not worry about it. And there you have it. Maybe this one petal here, if I rotated it and just rotated it a little to get it out of the way, that could work. Now, I have a problem with this stem. Joe, what do you think about this stem? What's wrong with it for a flower?
Seems really straight.
It's very straight. It was a fake flower that was in the garden that they make. They have a very straight shaft. So this one
Looks kind of like a windmill.
yeah, something like that, which is fine if that's what you want. Now, it doesn't have any segments, so if I try to bend this, it's not going to bend, okay? You need some segments so it can bend along those segments. So here with the polycylinder, and you can only do this on the first one, the duplicate won't do it. I can give it some subdivisions on the height. So let's say I give it 12 subdivisions. And so you can see the subdivisions there on it. So you could manually come in and grab different parts of this and bend it. So I could come in here, and if I went to vertices and I grabbed all of these, and then I went E and I went D to move this up so it would pivot right about there. Notice how the snapping is on. I really like to turn that off because it gets in the way. And I went E and I rotated this. You could see that I could rotate these, and it's not really helping me do what I want to do. I could W and move them, and you could see I could start to make this. And if I grab these down here, right in there, and move them, you could get a crooked stalk. But there is a nice tool to bend things. And I'm going to undo past all that playing with this. If I go to object mode, right mouse, object mode, and I select it, they have some deformers, which actually work very well. So here under modeling, deformer, these nonlinear deformers work pretty well. And so with the stem, what would you want to do? Flare it, squash it, twist it, wave it, bend it? Bend it?
Bend.
Bend, good. So if I go bend, notice that it always comes in this way, and it comes in a straight up and down way. And if I hit 4, which is wireframe, you can see the line in there. See that yellowish line? So if I go, and these bend tools, these deformers are a little bit more advanced. But if I come in here to the channel box and I go to this bend, you can see there's a curvature here. And if you use your middle mouse, click on curvature and moves your middle mouse here. See how I can bend it? But there's a problem with this bend. What's wrong with this bend, Yulia?
Well, it doesn't look natural. I think because it bends in the middle.
It's bending in the middle. It's also the top is bending when I need it to be attached to the flower. So there's a high bound, and see how I can adjust it. So I can adjust it so the high bound doesn't work. And there's a low bound where I can adjust the bottom so I can give it just a bend there. Or you can actually take this tool, and if you moved it up, see where it would change where the bend happens. So you could have the bend down here at the bottom or up here like that. And so that flower is kind of bent with the wind, which could be all right. So with this curvature, you can adjust the amount of bend like that. With the low bound and the high bound, you can adjust where the bend starts and where the bend ends. Low bound, high bound. And if I wanted this to bend twice, I could select the object and I could delete the history to get rid of this bend. Delete by type. Before I delete the history though, you could actually animate this bending if you thought it helped your flower. And so if you do that, also if you move your flower, if it was all one piece, you can see as you move away, the bend changes, which I don't necessarily recommend. So with this,
Why is it changes in size? Because the perspective?
well, because the bend is here in the middle, and as you move away from it, the curve is different. The tool is still here. Let me see if I can show it. I think it just does that. I'm not quite sure, but if you move it away, it changes. I'll show you that with something else. But I'm going to go Command Z and just put it back where it's in the middle. And if I go Edit, Delete by Type, History, notice it gets rid of that bend. So now if I move to the flower, it's not changing the twist on it. Now I could come back in and go here under Deform, Nonlinear Bend. And this one, see how it's a little bit off center. But if I came in here to Curvature and I bent it, I could go to the high bound and go to 0. But the low one, I could curve it the other way. So I've got a couple of twists in it. See how it's starting to get more of an S shape. So you could use this bend. I'm going to go W. And you could see that you could put this bend in a couple places like that. Click on the cylinder, Edit, Delete by Type, History. And so now I have a stalk that looks a little more normal. What haven't I done lately, Joe?
Haven't created the project or saved.
I haven't saved, I haven't created a project. So here under File, it's really important to do the project window, make it new, call it Flower, or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to the desktop, I'm going into my documents and my Maya folder, which is fine. I'll say accept to make all these folders. And then when I save the scene, I can save it into the flowers scene folder. And I can call this Daisy. I spelled Daisy, D-A-S-E-Y.
I think it's
Well,
DAISY.
I-S-Y, yeah, I think so. You can spell it out any way you want, but if your boss is
Yeah.
watching, they probably think you're not as bright if you don't know how to spell, even though creative people sometimes do not know how to spell.
Yeah, that's
I
what
always
Google's for.
spell check it helps, you know. So there's my object, and it's here. And if I want these to be all one piece, you can select them all, and you can go mesh combine. Now you can always separate that later, but now it's all one piece, and I can move this around. Though, do flowers move? Well, if they're animated, they do. So this flower, if I move the pivot, D, I'm moving D pivot down, and I move the pivot to here. Sometimes you have to check another view to make sure it's correct. So if I wanted these flowers to dance in the wind, probably with that song from Wizard of Oz, we're out of the rain, we're out of the na 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 na. I don't know, remember the words, but we could do here E, and we can come here and we can hit S to set a keyframe. See the red line? Then I could come over here. 24 frames per second is what Maya normally renders at, but you can change that in the preference. And I could move it over here, hit S, come over here at 24:48 and rotate it back to here, S. And then I could come over here and move it back to the middle. And if I wanted to be completely straight, I could type 0. And so if I played this, all right, now, one thing I didn't do is here, I didn't set a keyframe when I set this to 0 by hitting S, so that now it's going to do the full swing. Now, one thing that's really fun in Maya is on your Windows, there's an animation editor called a graph editor. And what the graph editor does is when you have the object selected, it shows the motion in a graph form. Now notice that Maya curves this graph, so it has acceleration and deceleration. So as this flower is moving, it doesn't abruptly go bunk, bunk, bunk. It gradually speeds up, comes back, more like London swings like a pendulum do. That's an old song. I don't know, Paul Revere and the Raiders or something. So you can do this, but if you select these all, you can modify how far it moves by moving individual points. But under curves, I can say post infinity cycle. And if I use my Alt key and zoom out, just like we zoom out in Maya, you can see it's got a little bit of a bump here, which I don't like, which I could adjust here by moving the handles or adjusting the point. But no matter how much time I have, my flower's always going to, I actually looked like I changed the scale there for a second. It looks much nicer. It's very much happy, but this will dance.
It looks more bob and weavy.
Yeah, yeah, it's more like Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
And sometimes I use old references, so forgive me. Fly like a butterfly, sting like a bee. So there we are, bob and weave, rope-a-dopey. So anyway, I like that graph editor because you can go in and set it. Now, it's also neat that I believe if I duplicate this and I did Control D and I move it, I believe they both will have the animation. Nope, sorry, that didn't work. Well, that's too bad, but I think I can go here and I can copy the keyframe, click on this one, paste, I'm using my right mouse, the keyframe. It's remembering the position over there. So I don't think I can copy and paste the keyframe as much as I'd like. I'll go S. And then I could make this one animated too. Sometimes you can copy and paste the keyframes. I'm gonna have to figure that one out. But we've got this one dancing. Now, one thing we did not do is I'm gonna go in here and I will go, and if you look at these, we want to colorize these individual parts. We should have done that before we grouped it. We can't colorize them very well. We could pick the polygons in here. So I'm going to ungroup it, which might mess up my animation. So you actually have to do things in a bit of order, but here I'm going to separate. And if I separate it, is it still moving? Okay, good. I didn't lose my animation. So I can click on the stem. Here, right up here, is our hypershade. Most 3D programs just call it a shader. Maya calls it a hypershade because they think it's even better. It's very powerful, but I don't know that I'd call it a hypershade. And so here we look at materials, and I like to view the browser, sometimes under window browser. Let me see which one I want. This sometimes doesn't give me the materials I want here. Because they normally show up here down below. Let me see if I can get this back to the default. Sometimes you can go up here and you can reset Maya to classic. Let me see. Modeling standard. I'll switch it to standard. Changed my view, but I'm just trying to get that hypershade back to the way I like it, where it shows the materials here. So output graph, normally it does the way I want it. View. Browser normally, outliner, nope. Create materials. I can do it here. I normally like it down there. So you can actually break this off by going create materials and going to the top of the bar and let go. And I like the materials here. Normally I use the Phong E, Berlin, Lambert, and they normally show what they look like. I'll find out where that is next time and make sure I have it set up correctly. But I'm going to use Phong. Phong E has a little shinier. And there's the Phong. If I double click on it, it shows up here. And I can pick a color for the stem. What color should it be, Yulia?
Yellow.
The stem for the flower. Yellow could work.
Green.
Green is good. Brown means it's dead. But yeah, you could pick a green. It could probably be yellow. I mean, maybe some flowers have a yellow stem.
Never mind, should be green.
I think green's a good color choice. You can actually use the picker here. This is kind of a the photo green, which you might not want to use if you're going to use dropout green screen. But we can make it a little darker. And there we are. And then you can take this and drag it to just the stem. Notice my stem is only bent in one direction. And you can just middle mouse drag it and drop it to the entire object. You can also, if it's selected, you can use your right mouse and say sign material to select it. All right, Joe, I'm going to duplicate this Phong, and before I do, I'm going to double click here. I'm going to call this stem. Stem. And I can do Control D. I like that. And say continue. It gives me stem 1. This is going to be the center of the flower. And I'll call that, I don't know what the center of the flower is. I'll call it center. Probably a name, stamen, pistil, whatever. What color should the center of the flower be, Joe?
Maybe like a yellowish, for the
Yellowish?
kind of an earthy yellow.
An
More,
earthy yellow. So
can we go-
yellowish
That's what I
brown.
meant. That's what I meant. I just I confused the words. I'm sorry.
That's all right, no problem. We'll work on that also. I'm going to make it kind of a yellowish brown.
More,
Or do you want
Earthy.
more yellow?
no, that's perfect.
Okay, good. And then we have to say done with this. They put it at the bottom. I don't like that. And we can drag that middle mouse to the center. If you can't, you can grab it and say right mouse, sign material. And so I'm going to duplicate that again because I think it has a nice kind of a light sheen to it. And we'll call this petal. Now you got to be careful which one you change, because if I change the center one, it should probably be center 1. That's the one I'm going to change and call petal. And what color should the petal be, Kyle?
Let's go
White,
with
white.
yellow.
White.
No, actually, well, red. Try red.
Try red. When your girlfriend says white, I don't know. Sometimes you should listen.
Let's do like a reddish, white.
We'll go with that pink. We'll compromise. Pink in between. There we go. And we'll say done. And so with this one, if I would have colored it before I duplicated it, would have been easier. But if I go shift like this and get all these petals, or I could marquee them and then shift and deselect, holding shift down. And I sometimes the tool gets in the way, you hit Q and deselect those. Then I can go and say assign material to selected. And we've got these pink petals. So if I render this, it looks like that. And that's with the default lighting. Depends upon what renderer we're using also. We're using Maya. I clicked on this gear. And that looks really good. But I would like to do something to this center. If I go to the center and I double click on it, it opens it here. And I could go to the bump mapping and click on this little checkerboard. And they have these, what they call procedural textures that are always there. And there's one that looks like leather. So if I click on it and it adds leather, and you can change the values here, and there's leather. You can even change the contrast. But since I did it in the bump, when I zoom in on this and I render it, you can see the bumpiness on it. And it has this leather texture to it. Now, do we think those bumps are too much? Or are they not enough? Should they also be the color?
I think there should be more of them.
More of them. So with the leather, and I'm actually going to go to the cell color here. And when I go to my color center and double click, under color, I'm going to pick leather also, so that it has the leather color as well. And you want more bumps. So if we render this here, you can see it's picking up the darker colors. There's not a lot of color contrast. If I go here and I make this even darker.
Hey Doug, I'm sorry, but I have to leave. I have another meeting because I
All right,
was-
please go. And Kyle, do you need to go?
Yeah, because we're using my computer and I need it.
Okay, you guys, thanks a lot. You take care. I'll talk to you later.
You too, Doug. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
All right,
you.
no problem. I'm gonna go just a little while longer with Joe.
Sure, I'll just
All right.
watch it in a video later.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, bye.
Control S, you're welcome. So I put this bump on, I just made it a little darker so it gives me more contrast. Now, there's a cell size and this density I can change. So I think if the cell size was a little smaller, I'm going to go 2. Now, I also have to change it in the bump. So here where it says bump and leather, I want to go change the cell size there also because I want the bump to match the color. And so now if I render it, you can see it actually gives a nice little swirl there.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's an happy accident, but I think that really looks like a sunflower. Now we could put something else on the petals to make them a little bumpier too.
To kind of give them a little more texture.
Yeah, now I would like them to have kind of a seam, and you can actually do that in Photoshop, and we'll talk more about that. But in this case, I'm going to use one of the procedural textures for the bump. And I don't think water might be interesting, but water and ocean actually move. So the texture would move on it, which might be interesting. I think the water doesn't move unless you tell it to. So I just put water into them. And see how it gave us some crinklies.
Yeah, it
here.
gives a little crinkle effect.
And that's because of those triangular things there. I don't think it's bad, but is it moving? We would have to render it and see. Let me take this hypershader out of the way here and move this panel up. And in my timeline, which is not showing anymore, I've got to go to Maya Classic and get my timeline. And have to go back to 6 to show my textures. I don't think the textures are moving. Ocean actually moves, but the waters, we could adjust the water a little bit too. So with these hypershades, there's a lot going on. A lot of things that you can do. So in the bump water, I could change the number of waves. I could change the time. Oh, now they're moving. The wave time. So that might be interesting. You can change the velocity and you can change the amplitude. You can actually change those over
Yeah.
time.
That kind of looks like an age, almost kind of like an age effect.
Yeah, like it's
You know,
getting
like a-
older. Before it's, before it's gonna die and then the petals can all drop off. So
That's
and it
pretty
probably-
cool that that's all built in.
yeah, it's probably wouldn't be dancing so happily. But there we are. That's actually a neat look. I like it. I'm not sure that it's as realistic for a flower, but I like it. So, and you can
Goes
so
with the
there's-
dancing flower theme.
What's that? Yeah, it does. I think so, and I'm very happy with the dancing flower. Now, there's one other thing you can do. Well, there's lots of other things you can do, and I better save. Good. If you go in and you go to a rendering and change this to rendering, we can add a camera. This one right here. We can look through the camera under panel, look through selected. It's inside the flower right now. But if I use my mouse and I back it up, we could have it here. Now I could just have the camera be stationary and the flower would be moving like that. Or I could even do S, set a keyframe, and have the camera move in. Alt and move in on the flower. S. And so it's here. I didn't do a keyframe. Let me zoom in again. Need to look through the camera. So window outliner, get my camera. Here's the new camera. I normally call this render cam. Space CAM. And then if I'm looking through that camera, then I can move it and zoom in. And I move the timeline later on. And I'm moving it just with the Alt key and the mouse, like we move anything else. Zooming in right there to the center. Almost looks like a planet. And then I'll hit S to set the keyframe. And so as it's dancing, we're moving in on it. Now it gets out of the scene here, so I might take the camera and Alt move it over and set a keyframe so that it follows it and then comes back over here. So that's our little animation.
It's pretty cool. It's like it's zooming in on the bee that's on it.
Like the bee, yeah, I actually have a bee we can bring in. It's a spaceship, but it looks like a bee. And so
That's pretty neat.
Then we can render this. I'll talk about render settings later. Now, anytime you render this, have you used Photoshop?
Back in Coleman days, I haven't done too much Photoshop since.
If I render this right here, I can save this. And I can save it as a PSD, which is a Photoshop image. This is just a still image, but I'll save it to the desktop. And this saves what they call an alpha channel. So when I'm in Photoshop, if I go to selection and I load it, it can delete the background away. And so I can put any background on it. Do you want to see that? And then we'll call it a night.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So I saved it as a Photoshop doc. Did I save it to the desktop? Save image. Flower. Dance. I'll just save it to the desktop. Probably you would save it to your source images, but I'm going to go to the desktop just so I can find it. And then I will open Photoshop, and then I'll have to switch so you can see Photoshop. Photoshop is opening. Actually, that flower looks pretty good with those textures. I got lucky. Years of working in Maya.
The swirl really does look cool though in the middle.
Yeah, the swirl was very special. I'm going to have to do this again. Cherry, pear, watermelon, and ginger ale. I think maybe some scotch would help too, but I didn't do that. Not for lessons. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share, and then I'll share Photoshop with you. And I'll just go File, Open. Can you see Photoshop? Can you see Photoshop, Joe?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I muted myself. Yes.
That's all right. Okay, good. That's all right. And we'll find the flower dance here. It should be in the Fs. Flower. I think I can just type F. Flower dance. There it is. And we'll open it. So there's the flower dance. Notice how the background transparent automatically. So I can go File, Open, and I can find on my desktop, I have some flowers. I think put a scorpion behind it. Thought I had it. Here's an orange flower. So I can take that and copy it. And as long as I paste this behind this one, paste it, and then I just unlock it and move it down. And I'll just go T, Control T. Oops. Select that, Control D to delete that, Control T to transform this, and I'll just shift it and make it bigger, Alt key. And so that daisy is right there. Let me go Alt, double click, and so you can composite the still images, but in Maya, if you render all the still frames as either GIFs or PNGs or Photoshop images, you can actually have it animated with a transparent background. You can put any background in it you want it.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm gonna say good night.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug.
All right, no
Very
problem.
informational.
Yeah, and anytime you need to do your other schoolwork, that's more important. You're gonna make a living with that. I mean, you may make a living with this, but this
Of course,
is more,
I don't know.
but yeah. So, but your schoolwork's more important. All right.
Thank you for your time, Doug.
All right. You take care. Bye bye.
All right, have a good week.
All right. Now let me
Bye.
stop share and we'll end this.